done? What came over me? Who am I? It was wonderful. I loved every minute.
Sally Field is now 78 years old and has had an incredible career in Hollywood. She has won 2 Academy Awards and is known as one of the most loved actresses in the industry. Throughout her many years in movies and television, she has given unforgettable performances that have touched millions of people. However, behind all the success and public praise, there is a side of Sally Field that most people never see. Like many actors who have worked in Hollywood for decades, Sally has experienced her share of difficult relationships with fellow performers. Over the years, she has had to deal with co-stars who made her professional life challenging in various ways. Some of these conflicts happened on movie sets, while others took place behind the scenes. These experiences have stayed with her throughout her career and have shaped how she approaches her work and chooses her projects. Now, with the wisdom that comes with age and experience, Sally has been more open about discussing some of the actors she found most difficult to work with. These weren't just minor disagreements or small personality clashes that happen on any film set. Instead, these were serious conflicts that affected her deeply and made her work environment uncomfortable or even hostile. The relationship with Bert Reynolds. One of the most significant and complicated relationships in Sally Field's life was with Bert Reynolds. Their romance was highly publicized in the late 1970s, and they were considered one of Hollywood's power couples. On screen, they had incredible chemistry, especially in the movie Smokey and the Bandit, which became a huge hit partly because their connection seemed so natural and real. However, what the public saw was very different from what Sally experienced in private. According to Sally, Bert was a controlling person who needed to be the center of attention at all times. He had difficulty accepting anyone who might challenge his position as the star, including Sally herself. Despite her own success and talent, Bert would often put her down in subtle but hurtful ways. Sally described how Bert would make comments about her appearance, question her intelligence, and minimize her acting abilities. He would give her what seemed like compliments in public, but they were actually backhanded remarks designed to make her feel smaller. When they were alone, he could be cold and distant, using silence as a way to punish her when he was unhappy about something. In her personal memoir, Sally revealed that Bert wouldn't let her speak freely in conversations. He would interrupt her when she was talking and would override her decisions, both in their professional work and in their personal relationship. She felt like he wanted her to be nothing more than a beautiful accessory to his life, someone who would stand beside him and smile, but never have her own voice or opinions. The emotional manipulation was particularly difficult for Sally to handle. Bert would be charming and loving one moment, then withdraw his affection the next moment as a form of punishment. Over time, this treatment began to affect Sally's sense of self-worth. Even though she was at the height of her career and receiving recognition for her work, she often felt invisible when she was with him. Sally later admitted that she never felt truly seen or valued for who she really was during their relationship. She was physically present, but she felt like the real Sally Field was being suppressed. Despite spending years together, she came to realize that she never really knew the real Bert Reynolds. The person the public loved and admired was not the same person she lived with in private. The cold treatment from Tommy Lee Jones. Another difficult experience for Sally came when she worked with Tommy Lee Jones on the movie Backroads. Sally was excited about this project because it had an interesting, unconventional script that would allow her to explore a complex character. She was looking forward to working with Jones and hoped they would be able to collaborate well together to create something meaningful. Unfortunately, from the very first day of filming, Sally encountered a completely different attitude from Jones than she had expected. He was not just professionally distant, but personally cold and dismissive. During rehearsals, he barely acknowledged her presence and refused to engage in the normal conversations that actors usually have to build trust and rapport. Jones would come to the set, perform his scenes, and then leave without any of the usual friendly interactions that help create a positive working environment. And for Sally, who had built her career on emotional authenticity and open communication with her fellow actors, this behavior was very unsettling. She felt like she was trying to act opposite someone who didn't even want to be there. Sally tried many times to break through this cold barrier. She would attempt to start conversations during breaks, ask questions about their characters, and even make light jokes to try to ease the tension on set. However, Jones would not respond to any of these efforts. Sometimes he wouldn't even look at her when she was speaking to him. The situation made Sally feel like Jones thought she didn't belong on the same set with him, as if she wasn't good enough to be his co-star. This was particularly hurtful because by this time in her career, Sally had already proven herself as a talented and respected actress. When the movie was released, critics noted that there was no chemistry between the two lead actors, but they didn't know that the problem wasn't with the script, but with the emotional distance between the performers. Sally later described the experience as emotionally draining. She said that trying to play a character who was supposed to be learning to love while working with someone who was so cold and distant felt like she was acting all by herself. The set wasn't just professionally challenging, it was isolating and demoralizing. The chaos of Robert Blake. Perhaps one of the most difficult and volatile situations Sally faced was working with Robert Blake on a project called Say Goodbye, Maggie Cole. Blake was known for his intense method acting approach and his unpredictable mood swings, and Sally quickly discovered that these qualities made him extremely difficult to work with. From the beginning of the production, Sally struggled to find any sort of rhythm or consistency in their work together. Blake would change his lines without warning, go off script in the middle of scenes, and add unscripted behavior that would ruin carefully planned takes. What he might have considered creative spontaneity, Sally saw as pure chaos that made it impossible to do good work. Blake's behavior wasn't limited to just his interactions with Sally. Sally was a big influence on his cast. When he and his wife Angela were on a bunch of takes, other crew members reported that he would have frequent outbursts, verbal tantrums, and sudden mood changes that created a hostile environment for everyone involved in the production. One day he might be quiet and focused, and the next day he might be shouting at a lighting technician or storming off the set over a minor disagreement. Sally found herself in the position of trying to keep the peace and hold the production together, but it was an impossible task. The tension and chaos that Blake brought to the set began to affect every scene they filmed together. Eventually, the entire project fell apart and the film was never completed or released. For Sally, this wasn't just a professional disappointment, it was a traumatic experience that stayed with her long after the production ended. She later said that there are actors who simply act, and there are actors who try to make everyone else feel small so they can feel big. Blake, in her opinion, was definitely the second type. The ego clash with Shirley MacLaine. When Sally worked with Shirley MacLaine on Steel Magnolias, audiences saw what appeared to be two Hollywood legends working together beautifully in a touching story about love, loss, and friendship. However, behind the scenes, the relationship between Sally and Shirley was far from harmonious. Sally approached her role in the film with deep emotional sensitivity, connecting strongly with her character as a grieving mother. She wanted to bring honesty, vulnerability, and nuance to the performance. Shirley, on the other hand, seemed to approach every scene as if it were a competition or power struggle. Colleagues on the set noticed that Shirley would constantly talk about her past Oscar wins, dismiss the director's instructions, and interrupt takes to insert herself into moments that weren't meant to be about her character. She seemed to treat every scene as an opportunity to show that she was the most important person on the set. One particularly emotional scene required 17 different takes. Not because Sally couldn't deliver the performance, but because Shirley kept adding sarcastic comments and turning moments of raw grief into comedic opportunities. It was as if she was deliberately trying to undercut Sally's emotional performance and make it impossible for her to do her best work. Sally tried to remain professional and gracious throughout the filming, but privately she was exhausted by the constant tension. She later described Shirley as someone who brought chaos wherever she went, not out of malice necessarily, but because she needed to dominate every situation and be the center of attention. The intimidation by James Woods, Sally's experience working with James Woods on Kiss Me Goodbye, was supposed to be enjoyable. The film was meant to be a light-hearted romantic comedy that would be fun for both the actors and the audience. However, from the very beginning, Sally sensed that something was wrong with the dynamic between her and Woods. Woods was known for his brilliant but intense personality. and he brought a kind of energy to the set that turned what should have been playful scenes into psychological battles. He didn't just deliver his lines, he would analyze them, challenge the director, and often rewrite dialogue on the spot without any warning to the other actors. Every rehearsal became a struggle for Sally, who was used to collaborative and emotionally honest performances. Woods would use his intelligence and sharp wit not to make the work better, but to assert his dominance over everyone else on the set. He would question the script, critique the direction, and even comment on Sally's performance while they were in the middle of filming scenes. What bothered Sally most was that Woods would casually suggest that she wasn't giving enough to her performance, that her heart wasn't really in the work. He would accuse her of not trying hard enough, especially during emotionally demanding scenes. To Sally, this felt less like constructive criticism and more like deliberate sabotage. Woods seemed to use his intellectual abilities and verbal skills not to engage with others, but to make them feel smaller and less confident. For Sally, who had worked hard to earn respect in a male-dominated industry, this treatment was particularly difficult to endure. She described the experience as a psychological minefield, where she constantly had to defend her worth and abilities. The Humiliation by Dustin Hoffman. The most surprising and perhaps most hurtful experience Sally had was with Dustin Hoffman, even though they never actually worked together on a completed film. In the early 1980s, they were both being considered for roles in a project that never got made, and they had to do a chemistry reading together. From the moment Sally walked into the audition room, Hoffman dominated the entire situation. He was already making jokes with the producers and commenting on the script before she even had a chance to introduce herself. When Sally finally began her reading, Hoffman interrupted her multiple times, not to help or collaborate, but to correct her delivery and question her interpretation of the character. Sally felt like she was being humiliated in front of everyone in the room. Instead of being treated as a respected award-winning actress, she felt like a school student being criticized by a teacher. Hoffman's behavior made it clear that he had already decided she wasn't right for the role before she even had a fair chance to show what she could do. The situation became even more painful when Sally later learned that Hoffman had bragged about sabotaging the audition. He reportedly told people that there was no chemistry between them and that he had made sure of that. For Sally, this wasn't just unprofessional behavior, it was deliberately cruel. The experience stayed with Sally for a long time. She spent weeks questioning herself and wondering if she had somehow failed during the audition. However, with time and distance, she realized that the problem hadn't been her performance at all. Hoffman had simply needed to control the situation and prove that he was the most important person in the room, even if it meant destroying someone else's opportunity. This experience changed Sally's approach to her career. She made a promise to herself that she would never again work with men who confused arrogance with genius, and she kept that promise throughout the rest of her career. The impact on Sally's career, these difficult experiences with various co-stars, had a profound impact on Sally Field's career and her approach to choosing projects. Each conflict taught her something about the importance of working with people who respect her as both a person and a professional. She learned to be more selective about the projects she accepted and the people she agreed to work with. Despite these challenges, Sally continued to have a successful career and maintained her reputation as one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses. She didn't let these negative experiences make her bitter or cynical, but she did become more protective of her professional environment and more aware of the importance of mutual respect in collaborative work. Sally's willingness to speak about these experiences, even years later, shows her strength and her commitment to honesty about the realities of working in Hollywood. Oh, Chosy. Oh, her story reminds us that even the most successful and respected performers face challenges and difficult relationships in their careers, and that standing up for oneself and maintaining professional dignity is always important.